Nobody is going to care about this rant. Here I go. A lot of times when people are recording drums, they use the Glen Johns method, which is where you put one drum overhead right up top and another drum overhead facing to the side next to the floor tom. And people use this sound a lot of times whenever they're trying to get like kind of like a vintagey 60s indie, like saturated overhead tone that captures a whole lot of the kit and kind of pushes it together. Glen Johns was an engineer in the 60s, and he worked on a Beatle record. He did work on other Beatle records, but he was the head engineer on only one Beatle record. And I feel like people use the Glen Johns method when they hear that he worked on the Beatle records, and they're like, wow, Abbey Road sounds so good. We should use the Glen Johns recording method because he was the Beatles engineer. Except that's not true at all. At all. Glen Johns was literally a replacement for Geoff Emerick, who was the actual genius engineer that made all of the Beatles sounds. And Glen Johns was only called in at last minute because the White Album was so brutal that Geoff Emerick literally quit on the job. And Glen Johns was the head engineer of which album? Let It Be, the album that the new Get Back documentary was just made about. And in my opinion, it is not even my opinion. It's objectively the worst sounding Beatle record. Like Please Please Me sounds miles and miles and miles better than Let It Be. Come on. And I feel like people reference the Glen Johns record and they don't do their homework to figure out who they're actually talking about, because none of the Beatles' best drum sounds use the Glen Johns tracking method. Glen Johns was an epic engineer. He actually got better later on, and he did all of the Zeppelin records, which is great. But nobody references the Zeppelin records when they're talking about the Glen Johns method, because if people are trying to get a Zeppelin sound, they do big old high overheads and they just hit the hell out of the drums. Anyways, that's my rant. I'm an amateur Beatle historian, so I'm sure I don't have some of my facts straight. Please correct me in the comments. This is very fun for me. I love being a nerd about this. But if you're trying to record drums and you're using the Glen Johns method, please do not think... Just don't talk about Abbey Road. Talk about a terrible Beatles album if you want. Not a terrible, it's an amazing album. A terribly engineered Beatle album. Let It Be. Those are my thoughts. Nobody cares. Nobody cares about this but me.